The running theme of the Datsusara thing is people who create their own path. The term itself, the Datsusara story, the term Datsusara is a Japanese term that refers to abandoning corporate life.
What an awesome word.
It's basically becoming a Ronin, like the masterless samurai who sort of goes off, and it's as cool as it gets, the concept itself. I was about to say Mavericks, but Sarah Palin fucked up the word forever, so we can't ever use it again.
But we can say awesome bags.
Yeah, that's the other thing that makes it easy to be sponsored by him, is that we don't have to lie. The stuff is amazing. The bags, computer bags, backpacks, everything, all handmade, which if you are a sensitive soul and you are into sustainable things and not just enjoying fucking up the planet, no pesticide, very sustainable crop. At the same time, if there was a UFC of hemp versus cotton, hemp would kick cotton's ass any day. Well, probably even easy to do. Cotton sass, come on, what's that? But in any case, it's like
Good one.
4 times stronger than cotton. Is like nature kick-ass fiber, so that's very good. One of the things that's nice about the bags is that antimicrobial, so microbes, germs, fungus, all kind of crap, especially if you go to the gym or you use bags in that type of environment, it's shady what you can pick up. Now with these ones, because hemp act against it, and essentially, the way I picture it is, and I swear I had no drugs in my body as I was imagining this, but I picture that if you have some atomic microscope and you put it on the Datsusara bag, what you would see are minuscule little hemp warriors, kind of like a whole army of the Chinese terracotta soldiers, but they're all made of hemp and they are like 1 zillionth of a millimeter big, and they are just, the second microbes hit the back, they start kicking royal ass, and they let out their best imitation of a Bruce Lee Kiai before they attack and kill all the microbes coming in. So that's a Datsusara bag, microbes never stood a chance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network and theseedsofliberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. So today we have Daniele Bolelli. He's a history professor at Cal State in Long Beach and Santa Monica College. He's coming in from California. And what initially caught my eye was his historyonfirepodcast.com. And also, he has his general page, DanieleBolelli.com, and also his Facebook page on the same name, Daniele Bolelli, and his personal profile by the same name, keeping it consistent. And on Twitter, @DBolelli. And so we'll talk a little bit about his History on Fire podcast, because that's what really got me interested in his work. And he's written a few books, and his most recent one is called Not Afraid, and it's on Amazon. And also you can get the audio version of the book at his website, DanieleBolelli.com. So, Daniele, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Of course, man. My pleasure.
Yeah. I heard about you, through Prof. CJ when he interviewed you. And,
Nice.
And I really felt a connection with you because, first of all, interest in history and philosophy, and then, Daoism and martial arts. I'm like, God, how much similar am I to this guy?
Yeah.
So I really felt a connection there. But can you just go into, I guess, a little bit of how you got into Daoism and martial arts and history? I guess your love of history.
I think history, I don't know, since when I was a kid, kind of like when I started learning how to read, I had all these books that were about ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, ancient whatever the hell, and they were, a lot of images, but also a lot of text. So I was learning a little bit that way, but then I could get kind of like my fantasy run wild looking at the images and imagine what it would be like, and I dug it. To me, it was like always an adventure. There was always a story. It was always some kind of cool, and I never really seen history as anything other than that. It has always been to me this exciting, interesting thing that I would play with. It wasn't like some subject that I had to learn in school. So to me, that's where the whole thing comes from. It's both, I find it wildly entertaining and at the same time very interesting because you learn a lot about life through it. But the two elements were never really that far apart, the entertainment from the deeper kind of lessons you can get from it.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate when you have that interest in history and learning about the past, and then you go to a history class in government school, and that curiosity is just beaten out of you mercilessly.
Yeah, they are really poorly done. This is the kind of thing on the other end that, like, to me, when I'd rather have a kid who plays Assassin's Creed all day long, and I think they're going to be more likely to be interested in history through playing Assassin's Creed than anything that they ever learn in junior high. I think because that one kind of brings you in that award. You are interested, you are fascinated, it's almost three-dimensional, you care about it, you're invested personally. The other one is a kind of a memorization exercise with names and dates that have no relevance to your life, and so what's the point? It takes some really good teachers to make history come alive, and either most of them are not, or most of them are, but they are kind of limited in what they can teach based on just kind of standard curriculum, the way it's set up, that sort of squashes what they could do with it. So really the way we do history in grade school is pretty bad.
Yeah. My brother is big into video games, much more than me. And so when you say Assassin's Creed, I do know a little bit of that. And it's interesting that people will look at those kind of video games of history, let's say, and they say, that's violent, right? Because, it's worse than watching a movie and watching violence because you're in the video game and you're committing the violence, right? So it's worse, right? But then to me, that kind of presupposes the idea that people are violent because of video games or because of movies. It's like, wait a minute, don't you read history?
Yeah. People have done nasty things to each other for a really long time. So it's not that you are not going to have violence. It's a matter of figuring out a healthy way to channel that aggressivity. So, go work out, go train martial arts, go do something that, you're in touch with that dimension, but you channel it in a healthy way. Because it's not going to not be there. It's going to be there regardless. You just can either find a healthy way to express it or an unhealthy way to express it. But it's going to be there no matter what.
Right. And I mean, in all different kinds of cultures, for all different kinds of reasons, there has been violence, right? For, for religion, for, competing governments, for, territories, for resources. And people, when they say, it's inherent in human nature, violence, I tend to disagree, and I tend to believe that it's more a result of upbringing and human conditioning rather than human nature. How have you been raised? What kind of parents have you had? Have you had parents? Did they abandon you?
Sure.
Were you left alone, right, to fend for yourself? So I think that to me is more of an indicator of how an adult, comes out.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, the nature versus nurture things are always tricky because it's always both, it's never this or that.
Right.
It's a matter of how much of each, and that's where the argument is. Because obviously, it's both sides, both things exist. Of course, upbringing is huge. Of course, there's some natural element that's huge. But which one is the bigger one? That's where it's tricky to figure out. To me, I'm interested, like you, more into the nurture part. Because you can do something about it. The nature, there's nothing you can do about it. It's your DNA, it's who the cards you are given. So whereas if you put the emphasis on the nurture, you can emphasize more agency and what you can do about it to change it in more desirable ways. So that's kind of the way I look at it. But it's hard to tell because, when you look at the pervasiveness of violence in human society, sure makes you think,
Right, and before we get into your history, I just wanted to mention I listened to the Dan Carlin episode he did on Genghis Khan, the 5-episode one. It's excellent, fascinating. I'm sure all of his stuff is fascinating, but like one thing that he mentioned in there, which I'm sure he mentioned before, was the idea of the historical arsonist. That one character in history, just lights a fire of in a woods of decadent decadent, organisms, like things that are dying and decaying, and it just
Sure.
comes. This guy comes along and just lights a fire and allows for new growth. And it seems like a lot of people look at like Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great or Caesar, and they say yeah, he killed a bunch of people, but we got trade.
Right,
There was
right.
trade.
Yeah, it's tricky because a lot of things when you look at them in the great scheme of things, there are benefits that come from it. But all the people who were involved in it at that time, they sure as hell didn't see any benefit at that
Right.
time. They only saw nasty, thousands and thousands of people dying horrible deaths.
Right.
So that's the fact that you can say, hey, it actually turned out there was some nice silver lining at the end, doesn't really make up for all the damage done at that moment.
Yeah. It's like like he gave the example of Hitler, and people say, well, what if Hitler actually won World War II, and he over time maybe his descendants established the European Union in his way, or the Nazi Party way, and then people would be writing books about how Hitler's such a wonderful guy because he united Europe.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And the better question, rather than saying he's such a wonderful guy, is, well, why don't you ask the relatives of the people that he murdered?
Yeah, exactly.
They might,
No,
right?
That's why those things are impossible to evaluate in that fashion, for sure.
Right. So please go into a little bit the episode on the history of fire, the slave wars, because that was really a fascinating. First, you went into a little bit of about slavery and how, basically every society in the ancient world had slavery. And but then the Roman Empire, which basically we're all taught if especially we're living in the American Empire, like empires are wonderful, right? One rule of law, right? It's it's like you got one ruler and it's just wonderful, right? But again, what about the people that are conquered and like you said
exactly.
in the podcast, most of them become slaves.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's exactly how it is. You're absolutely right.
So so just can you go into a little bit about I know there's three of them, and the most popular one is the Spartacus, but like I didn't know a lot. Like I knew a little bit, I guess, about Spartacus because my wife was interested in the the HBO series Spartacus.
Sure. Yeah.
And although it's kind of bloody, but I guess that's still pretty accurate,
I'm down. Yeah, of course.
So so just give me your impression of that whole time period. Like, is it relevant? You think? Do you see similarities between, let's say, the Roman Empire at that time and today?
Sure. Certain dynamics don't change. And when you look at human history, a lot of human history is a struggle for power. And whoever can get their hands on some kind of power, usually they do whatever they can to hold on to it and expand it at the expense of other people. And other people tend to get screwed over, and so they want to fight it back because they want to get it. And, we tend to romanticize that the guys who get screwed over as the good guys, they're not necessarily the good guys, they are the guys who are getting screwed over, which it's, if you flip the roles, doesn't mean that they are not going to do the same thing, as often it happens in history. It's so a lot of the name of the game is crabs in a pot. You see these guys trying to take each other down to get what they want into it. So when you look at history 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome and the kind of games that the super elite played in order to hold on to as much wealth as humanly possible and enlarge even further, that's the same thing you see everywhere in big state societies. You see it today, you see it in China, you see it all over the globe in all times in history where there has been large state society, states, huge social classes. Those dynamics don't really disappear. And like I was reading right now, I was doing some research for a future episode. I was researching about Theodore Roosevelt, and I was looking about the clash between Theodore Roosevelt and he was pushing this antitrust legislation against corporate monopolies. Mm-hmm. And those things were identical to the dynamics of the Roman Empire, where you have Roosevelt, who's kind of your Gaius Gracchus of the time, was saying, look, we need to reform things, otherwise it's going to be even worse. There's going to be a real revolution here. So I'm not doing it because I'm a radical. I'm trying to reform stuff to save the state from its abuses. And then you have the guys who are more radical than him, but then you have all the backlash of the guys who want to hold on to their money, and it's like, what, I'm a billionaire? I need to be a multi-billionaire. What are you talking about? You're trying to strip me of my freedom by doing this. And so there's all this fight. The same dynamics that repeat themselves over and over and over.
Yeah. I think it's Mark Twain that said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that's very important to illustrate that, when you can study history and you can see patterns, and we can sometimes apply those patterns to the present day. And so the Roman Empire, like it's funny that when you ask somebody like, do you think the German people under Hitler had a right to revolt and rebel against their government? Right, and because their government, their government was tyrannical, and they're like, of course, yeah. What about people living under Joseph Stalin, right, and all the mayhem and destruction he caused in forming the Soviet Union? Do you think they had a right to rebel? Of course. Well, what about the United States? Are we not an imperialistic empire? But they're like, no. United States, it's different.
Right. No, I mean, and it's different by degrees. Of course, it's. Compared to Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union, the US today is a breeze of freedom. But compared to actual, what the ideal would be, it's really, really far from, you're talking, imperialism is imperialism, and you're talking about degrees. And of course, the fact that it's one of the things, like whatever people argue, you almost have to argue the opposite. Because the guys who are all telling you, US, freest country on earth, is amazing. It's like, well, but also no. Let's look at this, and this, and this. And you go through the lines, and there are horrific abuses of human rights and horrific things that have been done in US history and continue to be done. By the same token, then you get the guys who argue, US, the most evil power there is. It's the same as the worst thing. And it's like, well, there's so much worse. When you take it into account, not that bad. There are a lot of fairly good things, and yes, even the crap is not as crappy as in other places. So and both things are real. Too quick to dismiss the horrific history, then you become an apologist for really nasty things. If you obsess about all the nasty things and you don't realize that there are degrees and that it's not the same thing as like the worst things that we've seen in human history, and then you're delusional the other way. So, it's always a balancing game. It's kind of like, that's why to me, it's like I'm not interested in making absolutist argument of one kind or another. Like typically when I see two factions clashing on whatever that may be, politics, it's really about just about any topic I can think of. Usually you never have one faction who's 100% right. Mm-hmm. Even if they are almost entirely right, there's always going to be like one little point that on the other side they are making, which is a good point. It doesn't make it 50-50, it doesn't make it that they are exactly the same, but it does mean that usually reality is more complicated than any black and white worldview, and politics or history is no different than anything else.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. There's a polarization that happens when in government and when people vying for power, that's not a new phenomenon. People have an addiction to power. They say power is more addictive than cocaine or heroin, and I truly believe that. One of my favorite quotes of Charlie Chaplin is the best things you can do can be done with love, and only if you want to do something evil, that's why you need power.
Sure. Yeah, it's tricky because again, it's a tricky game. I mean, there's obviously a reason why people crave power, because it allows you to do more, to whatever you can do, any kind of power, whether it's financial, whether it's of any other kind, gives you more muscle to get stuff done. But in the same way, it's so easy to get lost into that power chasing game where you start justifying, kind of like the end justify the means, and you forget the end goal. It becomes its own struggle. You become so consumed acquiring power that then all of your effort revolves around acquiring power, and you really forgot why you wanted to have power to begin with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like Lord of the Rings. I can use the ring for good. I don't know.
Exactly. That's where it gets tricky. It's like, yeah, but no. It's. Yeah.
Right. So please, can you go into a little bit of how you got into Taoism and martial arts? I assume there's relationship with those two.
Sure. I mean, Taoism just always made sense to me, just reading about it and studying it. It was always one of the things that, if you want to be Christian, you need to follow certain doctrines that are about what being Christian is about. You want to be Muslim, you need to follow certain doctrines that. Taoism instead seemed to be fairly free in the sense of it's not asking you to believe anything. It's telling you just look out the window. This is how the world works. Whether if you recognize it, good for you. If you don't, it doesn't really matter because the world still works that way, whether you get it or not. So there's no effort really to convince you or to convert you or to have to take anything on faith. It's just this is the nature of the universe. This is how life works. You want that information, it helps you, go with it. You don't, whatever, doesn't matter. So it seemed very kind of self-evident to me, a lot of Taoist thing. It was something that was just, it seemed like sort of enlightened common sense. It did not seem like some doctrine of beliefs that I had to accept on faith or on any other level. And also be very flexible. You can actually apply Taoism in a bunch of contexts. You can belong to whatever religious denomination, belong to any kind of philosophical worldview, and you can use Taoist principles in your own life. It doesn't require you to kind of give up whatever it is that you believe or you're about in order to embrace these new sets of beliefs. It's not really a belief. It's like saying, it's like studying gravity. If you leave something over your head and you let go, it's going to fall on your head. Believe in it or whether you don't, it's still just the way it works. So to me, there was a practicality to Taoism that I found attractive.
Yeah, I studied. I read the Tao Te Ching for the first time in high school by accident. I found it in the library, and I think it was like in 11th grade or 12th grade, and fascinated me. I loved it, and I was always interested in holistic medicine, holistic nutrition. And
Sure.
so I just from there I just decided, Chinese medicine, acupuncture and Chinese herbs, and all of that is based on Taoism heavily. So it really fell into place with me. And and like you said, it's a very tiny book. I don't know, 70, 80 pages, but it's almost like poetry, but with profound statements and principles, and like you said, self-evident. Like it's just, yeah, like to say such truths in the smallest amount of words is a real feat to me.
Yeah. No, and it's brilliant. And depending on which translations you read, it makes a very different effect. Some parts are, some translations are terrible, and you read it and you're like, what is this crap? And other translations are brilliant, and they help you get it in a fairly easy way. So that it's tricky. There are, the Tao Te Ching is so quick to read. You can read it in 2 hours and be done, but at the same time, you can spend a lifetime studying it because there are so many degrees and so much nuance to it. It's interesting.
Yeah, a couple of the principles, the Taoist principles that I really took to heart were, one of them is yielding. The idea that a small sapling is powerful, has strength because it can yield to the to the wind, to the strongest gale, whereas the mightiest tree that's dry and old cannot and will break. And so the idea of strength, it's not a matter of brute force, but it's a matter of what can you tolerate, right? What can you absorb and then divert away from you so that it doesn't harm you. And I thought that's a powerful principle that you could apply to martial arts, but also in just talking with people or relationships, or and how you just you just got to be easy. And also another idea that I really loved is the idea of water overpowering stone, right? Not through brute force again, but just through gently falling over many, many years can wear away the strongest stone. So
absolutely. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting, that the Tao Te Ching, with the idea of emphasizing both the yin and the yang, they say, well, the yang, we don't need to emphasize it because everybody understands strength. Everybody understands effort. Right. Everybody understands that kind of vibe. So while yes, it is important, no, we don't really need to talk about it because it's self-evident, it's obvious, everybody gets it already. Yin, on the other hand, the yielding aspect, the more flexible aspect, the less obvious aspect is one that does need to emphasize because people don't get it. So it's not to say that yang is not important, but is not, it doesn't, you don't need to read anything to understand that level. Whereas the yin does require research because it's more subtle, it's less, for our monkey brains, is not as easy to grasp right away. So you need to figure out, it's easy for me. Okay, I punch that guy out, I win, I stand on top, get what I want out of it.
Right.
It's caveman-like, it works, but you don't need to study to get it. Whereas to figure out how to get the same job done in a way that doesn't require the outward use of force, that requires more strategy. So that's why, to me, many people tend to get infatuated with Daoism and they emphasize only the yin. It's all about, and that's not the way it works in reality. In reality, you need both, and you need to be able when to apply each. If you look at judo, the martial art of judo was Jigoro Kano kind of reframed the whole jiu-jitsu curriculum he had studied in order to make it fit with Taoist principles. So he got rid of all of the techniques that require too much strength. He got rid of he was very much on all of judo should be a reflection of Taoist principles. And yet, when you look at judo contest, you see this guy sweating and grunting and using muscle. It's not this sort of the image that people have of Tai Chi, of just you barely move and the other guy is flying away. But the key there is not that. Is it a contradiction? It's not, actually. It's just what Kano and the Tao Te Ching tell you is use as little strength as needed to get the job done. As little strength may still mean a hell of a lot of strength. You're just trying not to overdo it, not to, by using technique, you can make up for a lot of strength. You can make up for all of strength, but you can make up for some. And so to me, it's important to understand those dynamics because you do need both. But obviously the yin aspect also tend to be, whereas a strength is going to decline with age, strategy doesn't. Strategy lasts a lot longer. Your ability to manipulate the game in a way that requires less strength is something that you can carry with you for much longer in life than you can carry your physical attributes at your absolute best.
Yeah. I studied karate for about 8 years when I was like a teenager. Not necessarily because I wanted to. Something my parents, especially my father, wanted me and my siblings to do, and I did not enjoy it. Not much. I went into a brown belt, 3 stripes, and then I quit because I didn't want to get my black belt. But then afterwards, I went to college and I learned Tai Chi and Qigong, and that really fascinated me. It really did because like you said, everybody understands the strong aspect of fighting, but not many people can appreciate the the yin or the yielding or the the absorbing or the importance of having a strong stance, and having a strong root and things like that. So that's what fascinated me about that.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes it interesting. The beauty of martial arts is that there's a live practice. So, we can theorize from here to forever, but ultimately it's what works and what doesn't, and you discover it by doing it, by practicing.
Definitely. So please, can you go into your recent book, Not Afraid, and just my listeners know what it's about and why you wrote it?
It's really based just on life experience. I was thinking of writing a more philosophical book, but then I realized that anytime I discuss things in more philosophical ways, people may be interested, but they only go so far. When I talk about personal life, the level of interest and the level of how people are able to relate to it tend to go sky high really quick. So it made a lot more sense to me to, rather than presenting this appearance of philosophical objectivity and talk about great principles, is to bring it back to a very raw, personal element of the story. So in this regard, the book is divided roughly in 3 parts. The first part is about my experience of fear in the martial arts, fighting, dealing with that aspect when my personality was not naturally inclined to that. I was much more sort of yin, mellow, happy, I didn't, and so to me it was interesting to sort of step into an arena that's anything but that, where it's all about kind of adrenaline, competition, toughness, and all of that. And then, in some way, the stuff that I learn in that context, how they carry out to the rest of life, to the stuff that's actually really important. Because ultimately, what you do in the ring or on the mat is only so important. The big stuff is what you can take from that to the rest of life. And so in my case, I talk about sort of the whole experience of what happens with my wife, who eventually will, in 2010, she got a brain tumor and then died in early 2011. And then to life afterwards, when you realize that no matter how safe you play it, you can never play it safe enough because nobody's fully safe. Bad things can and do happen to everyone. So that realization, the realization that ultimately all the things that I'm afraid of, yeah, they will come true. And there's really not a whole lot I can do about avoiding them. So how does that help me sort of reframe my outlook on life? How does that... Because at that point, I mean, on one hand it's terrifying. On the other hand, there's the freeing aspect of it that is like, well, then I don't really need to be afraid, because if fear is not really protecting me from something, then what's the point of being afraid to begin with? It's enjoy the ride while it lasts, play while you can have fun, with the understanding that really nothing you can do, as the Jim Morrison biography, no one here gets out alive. There's no way to play it safe enough to get out truly what you want.
Right.
So those are kind of the dynamics of the book, of what I'm playing with.
Yeah, the idea of fear. It's a great topic to talk about, because fear can truly be paralyzing in so many ways. Can prevent you from trying new adventures. Can just prevent you from doing things like even if you have an unjustified fear of something like flying or public speaking. And it's quite sad that fear is present. So like one thing that I did, I don't know if you also did, but I did stand-up comedy a few years ago, and it was a great experience. I did it with my brother. My brother was 19. We took a stand-up comedy class, and then we just performing in stand-up and comedy clubs in Long Island and in Manhattan, and it's just an amazing experience. You meet amazing people. You just it's really soul exposing, I think, because you're going up there, no props, just you and a microphone. That's it. Have you ever tried anything like that?
No, I mean, I do public speaking for a living, so I've been
right.
forever. So it doesn't quite have the same degree of pressure, because you don't have that 20 second, you need to make people laugh every 20 second kind of thing. Right. It is, some people find it unnerving. Some people are really stressed out by the idea of having all these people looking at you and listening to what you have to say. Mm-hmm. But public speaking was never one that... It's funny how fear works. There are certain things that terrorize somebody else and they may not bother you at all. And then there's something else that somebody's totally natural at and they scares the hell out of you, It's so to me, public speaking was mildly scary at first, and then I kind of got over it fairly quick.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. I think it is different from what you do. And I remember a poll that was taken a couple of years ago, which asked people, what are you most afraid of? And the number one thing is public speaking.
Yeah. Of course.
And number two is death.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's public speaking doesn't bother me, but a lot of other things do.
Yeah. So, and the reason that my brother did it was because he's socially, I guess an introvert. He wanted to improve his conversational skills, how he talks to people, and so what better way to do that than to force yourself in front of complete strangers?
Oh yeah, for sure. No, and I think that's something healthy about, because you can avoid all the things that are scary in life, but the reality is that you can't really fully avoid them. You can partially avoid them. You can delude yourself that you can avoid them, but the reality is that eventually life is going to force you in some really uncomfortable place, one way or another. And if you are not used to being uncomfortable, then you're really going to be screwed at that point, because then you're going to still be trying to run at a time when life is not letting you run, where you are stuck, where there is no way out, you know? And in some way, like that idea of learning how to deal with fear, learning how to deal with being uncomfortable, learning all that, that's what applies to the rest of life. That's why, to me, in that sense, that's where martial arts can transcend, can be not just about martial art, but it can be about life itself in that regard. Because, I mean, the most interesting things in martial arts are the ones that is not the flashy techniques, is not the winning per se. In some way, the least glamorous aspects are the most interesting. The ones where you get learning how to get your ass kicked, learning how to fight on, even when you really have no realistic chance of winning. That stuff translates to the rest of life, you know, because it's not about technique, it's about toughness, it's about resiliency, it's about being able to stay with it, even when you really, there's no rational light at the end of the tunnel, there's no rational reason to think that things are going to work out at the end. So that, to me, is where it's more... it's relevant to everything. That's something that you can learn in a boxing ring or a martial art class, and you bring to just everything else in life.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of you know, my podcast and my website, peacefulanarchism.com, which you know, I originally started to just write articles, and I never really imagined starting a YouTube channel, but eventually I did, and you know, it's really because I was reading and learning about all of the horrifying things that our government, United States government, has done and is doing to you know, to its own citizens and those of other countries as well, and so I felt obligated to speak out and to just say my opinion of this stuff, and the fear was not, you know, initially I didn't have fear. Like when I started the podcast, maybe before I started learning about it, I kind of felt a little fearful. You're like, well, you know, the NSA is spying; they can read everything, you know, your text, your email, and everything. But the thing is, like, if you choose to be quiet, if you choose to self-censor, I think you already have admitted defeat. You have already claimed, or you have already decided that they control you and what you say and what you write, and so there's just there's just no more. I mean to admit defeat in that, which basically to me is like a spiritual defeat. You know, you say, I can't say this because somebody might be listening, somebody might be watching. Sure. That's a horrible place to be.
Absolutely. And on that note, one of the most classic ones that just about everybody would relate to is the fact that, you know, we all want to be liked. We all want people to respond a certain way to us. It feels good and it helps us get things we want. So naturally, people tend to want to always put themselves in the best possible light, always appear in the way that's most likely to get a positive reaction from other people. So that fear of how other people are going to perceive you, that fear of how other people are going to judge you, is a huge one that most people have to one degree or another. But at the same time, that's a really bad fear to fall prey to, because what happens is that then you start changing who you are in order to get a reaction. You behave differently from what you really want to be because of how... And then it's impossible to keep it up, because you're not really going to spend your whole life keeping this mask on. So you're just going to do it for as long as possible to get what you want, and then eventually who you really are is going to transpire. And so you're really not fooling anyone, but at the same time you're also putting yourself under this tremendous strain to pretend you're somebody that you're not. And that doesn't really work at all. It's kind of like if you go on a date and you try to appear something other than who you are, is great, maybe if you just are trying to get laid quickly, but other than that, if you're actually thinking about seeing this person multiple times,
right,
why would you do that? Then you have to be that guy the rest of your life. If the other person like that guy, that's who you have to be. Screw that. I don't want to be that guy. So those are the way those fears can limit us, can turn us into something other than we can and want to be.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of a this meme I saw which says, "I used to go into a room and wonder if people like me, but now I go into a room and wonder if I like the people in the room."
Yeah, it's so relaxing when you like yourself. You can enjoy who you are, and it doesn't mean you don't make changes. You know, you probably will see things you don't like so much about yourself, and then you work on it and you try to. But that's because you want to work on it, not because you're doing it to please somebody else.
Right.
And otherwise, it's so painful and heavy to try to act according to somebody else's script.
Mm-hmm.
There's something incredibly freeing when you are at home in your own skin and you feel like, hey, this is who I am. And I'm not going to make 3,000 compromises to pretend I'm somebody else. You know, if you like me, you like me. Mm-hmm. If you don't like me, you don't like me. Either one is fine. But let's not play games with each other. You know, let's just be real here. It feels really damn good. And oddly enough, by the way, people tend to respond to it 10 times better. Because when people are not thinking that, they don't get that feeling that you're trying to sell them something, where you're just being with complete radical honesty, that's how you live your life, people tend to respect you a little better. And if they don't, it's probably a good thing, because then you don't waste time with each other on... you know, it's like, you know, this is who I am, you don't like me, maybe they're okay, I understand why, you understand why, great, you go on with your life, I do my thing, everybody wins.
Yeah, and my wife, as I was, you know, writing my articles and doing these videos and interviews, you know, my wife would be, because my wife grew up in communist Romania, and she left there in 1994. So a couple of years after communism fell. And so she experienced that. And she experienced like the police, or I don't know what they would call over there, but, you know, the enforcement class, and how easily they could take somebody away, you know, for saying anything against, you know, the ruling institutions. And so she was fearful of that. And so her idea of living, of life, you know, her philosophy, when she talks about what I do, she's like, the people who survive in history are the people who run away, the people who hide, the people who don't fight back, basically. And so she was, you know, she always cautions me, like, maybe you're going too extreme, maybe you're too eccentric, maybe you're saying too much. And then I think about it, and I'm like, well, if I do run away and I do self-censor and, you know, not talk about this stuff, what kind of a message is that sending to my kids?
Sure.
Do I want to raise them to be like that, to cower in the corner, in the shadows, when people, you know, try to dominate and subjugate them? Is that the kind of child I want to raise, right?
Even because, I mean, it's not that you live forever. It's like you put yourself a little bit more. There's no surviving in history that way. You're still going to die the same way as the other guy. You just die later. Right.
Yeah, you never get out of it. You never get out of life alive, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? That's the core. And so yeah, it's so true that you know, I think it's so important, and this is what the internet has done a wonderful job of giving, you know, so many more people a voice, right? Like, you know, anybody can start a podcast, anybody can start a YouTube channel, anybody can start a blog, and it's just so easy right now. You know, the cost of doing such things is so low as compared to, you know, before the internet, right? Where you had to write a book, you had to write a pamphlet, you had to, you know, it's just time consuming, you know, and you make a podcast, how many people are going to see it all over the world? It's just...
No, absolutely.
It's magnificent. So I see a wonderful, you know, a wonderful future because of the internet. I think it has decentralized all of this information that before, like, I remember, I also listened to the Dan Carlin one about Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, and then the Anabaptists and in Munster, and how revolutionary was Gutenberg's printing press, right? I think it was in the 1400s, and it's basically comparable to the internet of today, you know, and how it has freed the people of you know, the how the priest class can control the peasants because they didn't know how to read Latin, right?
Yep, absolutely. No, that's in fact the technological innovation certainly makes certain processes way easier than ever before. You could, there are spaces for freedom in certain environments, but then of course certain technological innovations make it simpler, just like that. And that's clearly not a bad thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like even at that time, just with the Gutenberg printing press, how threatened the church was by the free flow of information, and the fact that they can print in their own language rather than in Latin,
Mm-hmm.
in this really eclectic language that very few people understood. And how much that scared the ruling institutions of the time, and they really considered it like intellectual contagions, like that's
Right.
infecting the masses.
Yeah. It's true. No, and it's funny because there's always that desire to kind of squash it and keep it under wraps, and you can't. Those innovations usually are too powerful for any one regime to control.
Yeah, and I see echoes of that in today with the internet and with net neutrality and with and within China, there's a good
Yep.
amount of internet censorship, and then
Sure.
in I think Great Britain as well, and and I think John Kerry, one of my favorite quotes of John Kerry is the internet is making it much harder to govern.
That's funny. That's pretty funny.
So yeah, it's I have a lot of hope for the future. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of the potential of what this global communication has to offer. Like I mean just like communication technology, like phones. I mean cell phones and like Skype, like we're doing. Like how
Sure.
how difficult was it just a short while ago to make a long distance phone call? How expensive it was.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so I'm very excited at what's happening, and I think my children, I'm very hopeful for the future. A lot of people are not hopeful. A lot of people are fearful, like of the draft, or what's going to happen, World War III, and all these nuclear powers coming, and all these insane leaders are threatening each other with nuclear bombs. But I don't see it that way. I see a much brighter future. I see more and more people are educating themselves, and not in government schools.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think it really is one of those glass half empty, glass half full kind of things. So you can really feel however you want, because there are obviously some excellent things that are happening that makes you feel hopeful about the future. There are a lot of horrible things that are happening that are making you not feel so hopeful about the future. So at that point, it really boils down to you're the kind of guy who's more glass half full or glass half empty. There's just no, because you have probably good reasons to feel either way,
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you another question I asked Prof. CJ, since you're also very history avid person in history. So if you encounter somebody that says, okay, Daniele, so I know you're interested in history, you have this history podcast, but that's thousands of years ago. How can that possibly help me to know about this stuff? It happened already. It's done. So why do I need to learn about this? What relevance will that have in my life? What would you say to a person?
I think the best thing that you can get from history is that it teaches you a lot about human nature and how humans operate. Just by virtue of being one person, you can only have so much experience in your life. Studying history is like being able to tap into the experiences of lots of other human beings. So if it's true that we learn from our own experience, how much easier it is to be able to not have to go through every single thing, but to learn from somebody else's experience. So you don't have to make all the same stupid mistakes to achieve the same conclusion, to get the same insight.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regards, I see history as a lab that allows you to experiment with what it means to be human, and you can look at all the other experiments other people have done to see which way it works. I think really that boils down to the most important thing you can get out of it.
Okay, very good answer. And also another question I frequently get asked is when I talk about history is I think my wife has said this many times is how do you know what you're saying is true? right? Like you know, I say, well, government history class, that's lies, but this is true. Well, how do you know? How do you know? You weren't there. You didn't see it. You know, even the books that you're dealing with, that's I guess you're the third person. You know, so how do you know? What's your security that what you're saying is closer to what actually happened?
A lot of times you don't. A lot of times you don't know whether that's the absolute truth that it happened. And so that's the reality that, just about most stories, there's like, this is what these guys say happened. But then these other guys argue this other thing. Okay, let's look at the evidence. These guys seem to have some solid evidence, these guys don't. Or in some cases is, the evidence is messy. It's kind of hard to figure it out. And so what you do is you honestly just report to the various versions. And who knows which one is the real one, So a lot of times, a lot of history, we act like we know more than we do. A lot of the times we don't. We have, which doesn't mean you don't know anything. You know something, but to piece it together in a fully cohesive story is a more complicated kind of game. And that's where you got to be honest and just admit what it is that you know for a fact, because there were like 15 different testimony of contemporary people who were there at the time, versus what it is that you know, maybe, hopefully, kind of, who knows, because you have somebody who lived 40 years later who wrote somebody else was told was there, So it's like, is that solid history? That one, not so much. Does that mean that it didn't happen? Maybe it did, but hard to tell, how to know for sure, So in that regard, it's not that it's all equally hopeless to find out the truth. Some cases are solid. Some cases are solid in the negative, in the sense that it's obvious that it didn't happen. And most others, there's a gray zone.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, I like to I like the idea that the idea of treason and revolution. Well, first of all, revolution. Well, treason, let's say, is tend to be seen in a negative light, right? But if the group of people that commit treason are successful, then it goes down in history not as treason, but as a successful, overthrow or revolution, right? So the idea of that the governments of today were all basically treasonous to the governments of antiquity, right? I think that's important to learn, that history is always written by the victors, and that you rarely hear history from the other side, which is why I love the book Howard Zinn's People History of the United States. I read that a little while ago, and it's great. You hear from the perspective of the Native American, from the blacks, from the women, from the Irish, from the Chinese, from all these groups that is just not given in the standard history class.
Right, absolutely, and that's why it's tricky, because you get. That's why, for Dan Carlin, or even for what I do for research in a podcast, you can read one book on a topic and you're done.
Right.
Because the odds that book contains the entire story are next to none.
Right.
Whether because of a bias, whether because they focus on some aspect, not others, whether because they chose some quotes and not others. You have to look at any one historical event from 10, 15 different viewpoints. That's where it's at. You really can't. You really can't do it on hoping that the first book you read is the one that nails it. It's like you need to read all these different points of views and then trying to reconcile them in a narrative that makes sense to you based on what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, and that's why I have immense respect for what you do and what Dan Carlin does and Prof. CJ, because I know an enormous amount of research and investigation goes into each episode, and it's not an easy task, like deciphering or going through it and disentangling the web of history and all lies and truth and everything in between. And
I got I probably one episode, it's probably about 200 hours worth of research at least on average. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. But right now I'm researching Theodore Roosevelt, and I feel like I already know the story by now so well because I've gone through so many. But then each documentary I check out, each other book I read, there's more to it, and then more, and then more. So that's where it gets dangerous, because that you can end up in Dan Carlin syndrome, where you think that you'll never know enough. and so you keep researching forever and you never release an episode again, kind of thing, which is clearly. And I understand why. It's because you feel that you could always use more knowledge. At the same time, you also want to get stuff done eventually. So at some point, you have to call it quits and say, okay, I've gone deep enough in this rabbit hole. I didn't find the end, but it's deep enough. And so it's a delicate balance to find between those two, between doing enough research and doing too much research.
Yeah, and what really impressed me with Dan Carlin was after I finished hearing the Prophets of Doom about Martin Luther in the 95 Thesis, he said that, and it was like 4.5 hours long, it's amazingly long, and he said, I just want everyone to know that I already did an episode of this in the same length, and I deleted the whole thing, which I rarely do, because I was dissatisfied with the result. And he's like, it's kind of like a painter, does a painting that takes months, and you want to get the perfect detail, and then finally you're like, nah, I don't like it, and you scrap it, and you throw it in the garbage. Wow, I mean, that really illustrated to me the amount of perfection that he was striving for. And it's really it's an admirable trait, being a perfectionist. And I guess it could be like self-destructive, but it's still admirable.
Yeah. No, it's tricky. It's tricky business for sure. I tell you that.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you coming on. So please, before we go, can you just let my listeners know? Repeat again your links, how they can reach you if they want to follow your work.
So the easiest one would be Twitter. Is my first initial, so the letter D, and then my last name, Bolelli, Bolelli. My name is my website, danielebolelli.com, so it's like Daniel with one E at the end, and then Bolelli, Bolelli. History on Fire podcast, you just type it in iTunes, it pops up. The other one I do is called The Drunken Taoist. That also will pop up if you look for it in iTunes or however you get your podcasts. Those are probably the easiest thing. Yeah, I have a public Facebook page, all of that good stuff.
Excellent. Yeah, and I really encourage everyone to check out his content because I was blown away. And as well as, Prof. CJ and Dan Carlin, I regard all of you as really being the top echelon of history podcasts, and it's really a refreshing to hear history in a engaging and riveting way, because I think it's hard to do that, and you guys pull it off excellently. And so
I enjoy both of those guys. I listen to Dan Carlin, I listen to Prof. CJ. Both of them are great podcasts. They do excellent work. They are completely different from each other, but they are both good quality.
Right.
Very informative, entertaining. So I dig them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know how hard it is to come up with good content and engaging content, and I really give you guys a lot of respect for that. So thank you very much for doing that and for coming on the show. So if anyone wants to help out my show, you can do so through PayPal, through Bitcoin, or Patreon. The links are below. My Patreon page is patreon.com/Peaceful Anarchism to help out the show, and please do help me out because I love having wonderful guests like Daniele Bolelli here, and I want to do more of it. And monetary compensation is always encouraged. The only democracy I support is voting with your dollar, right? If you want to see something more of in the world, you pay for it, value for value, right? So if you find value in this content, please donate to us. So thank you very much, Daniele, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, man.
Really appreciate it. So this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network and theseedsofliberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.